As I have ever since I moved out of my parents', I was supposed to wake up in my own bed in my own apartment, but somehow I have woken up in a room that looked to have been bombed a couple of times over. I got up and checked my surroundings. Weirdly enough, it looked a lot like my room, but in a completely run-down state. I cautiously walked out of the room, and that's when it hit me. This actually was my apartment. Most of the things in the apartment were either burnt beyond recognition or destroyed by some sort of an impact. But I could still recognize my fridge, my crisply burnt couch, and a computer chair that was missing its cushion. Yeah, it was definitely my apartment. I had somehow survived an overnight bombing raid and the ensuing fire. Not to mention, I must have been asleep for at least a few years when you consider all the dust that had been accumulated all around the apartment. It did not make any sense. I was going to go out onto the street level, but something stopped me in my tracks. I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the outside, followed by someone begging for mercy. I crawled to the window, then poked my head up ever so slightly. 3 assailants had one man surrounded. 2 of the assailants had machetes in their hands, and one of them had an axe. What followed the confrontation, I really don't want to describe them in words. I'll give you a hint. The attack wasn't motivated by vengeance, but rather it was a hunt. I'll let you fill in the rest. I was in a state of shock. I had never been so frightened. I went back into my room, then cowered in one corner, shaking and weeping in fear. I stayed in that corner until I fell asleep. When I came to, I was back in my intact, clean room, as if I had dreamt all of the post-destruction I had witnessed only hours ago. I thought for a second that I really must have dreamt all of it, but that wasn't it. For one thing, I woke up in the same corner I had fallen asleep. Perhaps sleepwalking could explain that, but there was no explaining my entire body being covered in dust. That's how I knew I had truly spent an entire day in a different reality. Somehow, I got a glimpse at an alternate reality in which Poland had been destroyed to ashes. I feel so fortunate that I'm back to where I belong. I never want to go back there again. I'm 22 years old, single and female. I live alone in an apartment, and that's about all you need to know about me. So the other night, I got off work really late. I didn't want to cook dinner that late, and thus I had picked up a meal from a local restaurant. I came home, took a quick shower, then sat in the couch with the TV on, so I could have dinner without feeling so lonely. I was eating and watching TV for some time, and I could have sworn the whole time I was seeing something moving in the air. I rubbed my eyes as if they would make things look clearer, but of course it only made things worse. Hence, I went to the bathroom and washed my face so I could rinse my eyes with water. That made it a little better, or so it seemed. I sat down on the couch again and was about to pick up the can of Coke on the coffee table. That's when I clearly saw it. Actually, it wasn't a it, because the it was a person and that person was me. Or should I say someone who looked exactly like me. We actually looked at each other with the most puzzling look on our faces. Then before I was able to pick up the can of Coke, the other hand had knocked it off the table. The other hand being the hand of the other me. Then poof, she was gone. My other self was gone, the Coke was spilling on the floor, and I of course was flabbergasted. Could it be true that different realities exist in bubbles right next to us? Maybe I witnessed the moment in which 2 bubbles collided for the briefest of time. The thought of another me existing and living a different life in a different reality is just so insane. But there I was, and there I saw it. Not to mention, she saw me too. I don't know how to explain any of it. I just hope I haven't gone mad. I've moved to Texas roughly about 3 months ago. I had a decent job offer and I figured it's better than living in San Francisco, where it's really become the sewer of America in the last 20 years. an expensive one at that. I was born and raised in SF, I'm 25 years old today, and I remember things were expensive in San Fran even when I was a kid. Right now, as things they are, SF is expensive, dirty, and dangerous, I might add. I apologize for that. It makes me so sad to think about my hometown. I had to rant a bit. Anyway, I work for a small design studio that employs 15 people in total. Our studio is about 2,000 square feet. It's not too big or small for 15 people. It's just about right. So the other day, I came into work at 8:50, 10 minutes earlier than usual. My boss and a couple of coworkers were there already, doing their own thing. I sat in my chair and opened the project I was working on the previous day. I left a good impression on the first 3 projects I had done for my boss. At that point in time, I had been working for him for only 2 months, but he had already granted me a very important project for my 4th one. It was imperative of me to do well on that project. Anyone who's got a job knows that your window to make an impact in a new company is in the first couple of months. After that, if you don't stand out, you're relegated to do the jobs of the easily replaceable 90%. With that being said, I began to work on the project and didn't get off the chair until 2 hours later. My back was aching a little bit, and I was going to do a lap of the office. I got up, looked around, and something seemed a little off. The floor was beige instead of white. I couldn't recognize some of the faces in the office. And most of all, my coworkers were all speaking gibberish. You know how you recognize real language from the fake ones? For example, I may not speak Chinese, but I recognize if someone's speaking fake Chinese. Well, it sounded like that. I mean, not Chinese, but like a fake language. I knew it was definitely not a prank since everyone in the office are serious introverts. I had never worked in an office like that. People almost never talk to one another. Therefore, the notion of the people in our office playing a prank is out of the question. So then what the hell was going on? Well, as far as I could tell, my coworkers had gone mad. I went up to Nicholas, the only person in the office who could be considered to be friendly. I said to him, "Why are you talking like that? Why is everyone talking crazy?" Do you know what Nicholas did? He laughed at me and walked away while speaking some gibberish. In that moment, I was genuinely scared. I thought for sure those people had gone mad. Was there something in the water or in the air? I didn't know, but I had to get out of there. I walked out through the front door and right away approached a woman who was smoking on the sidewalk. I said to her, "Excuse me, do you have the time?" She answered, "It's 11:12. I said thank you, then walked away from her, all the while screaming of joy inside my head. Obviously, I had asked her for time to check if she spoke English or the same gibberish as in the office. I had heard of this mental disorder that makes you hear nonsense. I thought perhaps it was me who had gone insane. After that, I took a deep breath and went back into the office. As soon as I walked in, I made eye contact with Nicholas, who sits closest to the entrance. He got up and said to me, "Whoa, that's crazy. I didn't see you go out. In fact, I saw no one go out. How in the world are you coming from the outside?" The truth is, I had nothing. I just said to him, "It's magic," then walked away. As I walked back to my desk, I heard Jillian talking on the phone with a client and she was speaking English. I also saw Pat talking to Kimberly and they were speaking English as well. If anyone had gone mad, it was me. Something like that has never happened to me before, nor has it happened after that. I'm a healthy, normal, young graphic designer. I don't do crazy. That's why I'm going to say that I was inside the glitch within the matrix. I won't blame you if you think that I'm making all these things up, but I truly believe I have witnessed the real deal. I know what today is. I know my age, my name, and all that is relevant to me. And yet somehow, a person who's been in my life for the last 20 years has stopped existing. He didn't go away, nor did he perish. He just no longer exists. Allow me to explain. One of the most wonderful memories I hold in my heart is of the day I went camping with all of my friends from childhood. There were 5 of us. We were brothers and best friends to each other. Although I loved them all equally, I must admit that Sergey and I were probably the closest. He was a friend who could read my emotions from just the look on my face. We enjoyed the same video games, watched the same type of films, and you get the gist. So then it was a complete mystery to me how Sergey had disappeared from the photos we took on our camping trip. There were 4 of us in the photos instead of 5. Sergey wasn't in any of them. And not to mention, no one remembers him. I spoke to my friends about Sergey and how I have all the memories of growing up with him. At first, they all thought I was just yanking their chain. But the more I pressed them for answers, the more they were convinced I was serious. My friends carefully mentioned about imaginary friends. We discussed about that possibility. But to me, Sergey is all too real for him to be a figment of my imagination. My friends, however, do make a good point. They say it probably isn't a coincidence that Sergey is so similar to me. After all, if he is an imaginary friend, then that's a person I had created with my own memories. It kind of makes sense that he'd be similar to me. But what about the photos? What is it exactly that's made me stop seeing Sergey in the photos? If he is truly an imaginary friend, then why now? Why did he have to disappear all of a sudden? I can't think of any big changes in my life that could prompt such realization, if it is to begin with. To be frank, I lean more toward the possibility that I was somehow transported into a different reality, which is the one that I'm living in right now, and I just got stuck here. I refuse to believe that I'm crazy. I can't prove it, but I know Sergey is out there somewhere. Back in the summer of 2002, I was 21, broke, and unemployed. At the time, I had been evicted from my apartment, but thankfully, a friend of mine allowed me to stay with her temporarily. With that being said, she kicked me out a month later. She and her boyfriend were going to live together. I understood, and I'm still thankful to her. I was in a bad spot. I made very little money working part-time, and full-time jobs were hard to come by. I was ready to give up my dream of living in St. Petersburg. I was going to go back home, but then I received an unexpected call from my cousin. Alina owned a general store in a small town some 800 miles from St. Petersburg. She called me because she had been injured in a car accident and needed my help with running the store. The job offer was for 3 months, and I accepted it. Part of the deal was free rent and lunch. It was the perfect opportunity to get back on my feet. I packed up and went to the town. To my surprise, it was much smaller than I anticipated. Look at it this way. The town's entire shopping district comprises of 10 stores on a single street, Alina's store being one of them. In any event, I had been working there for exactly 64 days. By then, Alina was almost fully healed. I saved up a good amount of money, and I also had a potential job lined up in Moscow. Another month here and I was going to be gone. So on the night of the 64th day, at around 7 p.m., I was in the store with Alina manning the cashier booth. 2 other stores were still open, and there was still some foot traffic in the area. I remember Alina talking about this guy she liked. He was a playboy, and I told her that he wasn't good for her. But Alina was totally infatuated with the guy. For whatever reason, she was trying to get an approval from me to make a move on him. I was getting tired of listening to her childish fantasies when suddenly there was a really powerful sound of something pulsing, followed by a total blackout. Alina grabbed the flashlight we keep below the counter. We then held each other's hands and walked onto the sidewalk. There were people outside and they all came toward us, much like moths attracted to lights. We were asking each other some random and useless questions such as, "When do you think we'll get the power back on?" and "What do you think happened?" There were questions that really couldn't be answered by any of us. About a couple of minutes had passed when, strangely enough, I could hear a voice whispering near me. A few seconds later, the voice sounded much clearer, and I realized I wasn't hearing it near me, but it was actually inside my head. In other words, normally sounds are generated from your surroundings, whether that be a person or a thing. But the sound I was hearing was coming from the inside. It felt like the sound were generated right from the center of my brain, to then which it was transferred to my ear canal. And here's the real kicker. It wasn't just me. It was happening to every person who was standing on the sidewalk. We all asked each other if we were hearing the whisper, and we all confirmed it to be happening. None of us could make out what the voice was saying, and it wasn't because the voice was faint. It was loud enough, and they sounded like real words, but the words were spoken as if they were whispered. 2 minutes of panic came and went just like that. The voice was gone. Obviously, none of us could explain why the blackout happened and why the voice was heard by all of us. We all sort of just went our own way after that. In that moment, at least, I don't think any of us were much interested in finding out the truth. We were all very much spooked. And that was the end of that. There was no explanation of the blackout from the local government. They also ignored our request to investigate the voice that we all heard that night. The government people told us that it was nothing more than mass hysteria, which, by the way, it wasn't. Personally, if you ask me, I think it must have been a weapons test. Imagine what would happen to a large city if you could plunge it into complete darkness, then make terrifying voices be heard inside the head of its residents. It could bring about chaos and destruction without a single bomb being dropped. I have zero knowledge of the military, but I think the theory is sound. I do hope I'm wrong though. It's terrifying just thinking about it. Yeah, I really hope I'm wrong. To tell you this story, we have to go back 22 years into the past, back in the days when I was still a teenager. I was 12 at the time, and my family and we lived in a house in the suburbs. I have 2 brothers. The middle one is 2 years older than me, and the eldest is 5 years the senior. They're both gigantic in stature. They take after my father. One thing that I always liked about my brothers is the security I felt when they were around. It wasn't just their sheer size that made me feel that way, but in fact, it had a lot more to do with how protective they were of me. Now, let's not kid ourselves. They weren't angels. If I were to write a book of all the mean pranks they pulled on me over the years, yeah, even today as adults, I would easily complete a 1,000-page memoir about my jackass brothers. Anyhow, this was before my brothers went off to college and we were still living together in the same house. We had 3 bedrooms. The smallest and the closest room to the living room was mine. The medium-sized room that was in the middle of the hallway was used by my parents. And as for my brothers, they shared the biggest room situated at the end of the hallway and furthest from the living room. So basically, all 3 rooms were connected by the same hallway, and mine was the closest to the entrance of the house. With that out of the way, we had a blackout this one night and the entire town had been plunged into darkness. The suburbs don't have tall buildings that reflect the moonlight during blackouts. I mentioned that because we used to live in a large city and I don't remember the blackouts there being so utterly dark. We had candles lit in the evening, but we put them all out when we went to bed. Inside the house and as well as everything out the windows were pitch black. It was quite spooky and I guess I was a bit edgy. But nonetheless, I fell asleep not too long after my father had blown out the candles in my room. At some point during my slumber, I woke up to an intense pain inflicted from an impact. I was being hit repeatedly by something long and sturdy. I screamed my lungs out as I went into fetal position. I think the body does that instinctively to protect the most vital organs and body parts. It didn't take long for my dad to rush into my room. My dad didn't even hesitate a moment before he lunged at one of the assailants. Yeah, there were two of them. He had one of them pinned down, but the other was still free to hit my father with the weapon he was holding. It was actually a metal pipe. I still remember the sounds it made when it hit against my dad's head and shoulders. It was terrifying. I got up and tried to hold on to the other attacker, but my body was in shambles by then and I could barely manage to stand straight. All of that happened in mere seconds, less than a minute, I would say. I remember getting hit with the pipe and crumbling onto the floor. That's when my brothers came running into the room, and finally, the assailants were subdued. By the end of it all, the two assailants were handed off to the cops, and all of my family members ended up staying at the hospital for the night. I say all of my family members because, as it turned out, my mom had been injured as well. I hadn't noticed that in the commotion, but Mom was actually in my room and she was trying to protect me. During the struggle, Mom was hit in the head with the pipe and she had lost consciousness. Thankfully, she only needed a few stitches to mend her wounds. The injuries were a bit worse for my dad and my eldest brother. My dad needed 20 stitches to close the gash on the back of his head, and he also had a broken rib. As for my brother, he had one broken hand, a dislocated shoulder, and over 30 stitches to close up all of his open wounds. Obviously, I got the worst of the hits. I had multiple fractured ribs, one broken ankle, and both of my arms were broken as well. It was a long road to recovery, but thankfully, I had my family to help me progress along the way. This all leads to the million-dollar question: why? And the answer is a lot more simple than you'd expect. The two assailants were quite simply angry young men. They apparently lived in town and had been in and out of jail multiple times for assault and battery. They weren't just criminals, they were psychologically unstable. I just happened to be the unlucky victim in a perfectly drawn-out scenario of a blackout. When we plunged into darkness, something primal and evil clicked in their heads, and all they could think of was hurting someone. At least, that's what they told the investigator. If there's one good thing that came out of the whole incident, it's the fact that those two lunatics will be held behind bars for a very long time. They won't be able to hurt anyone else for at least a long while. And that's a good thing in my book. I'm completely healed today, both body and mind. The same goes for my family, and we are all living normal lives. My brothers still try to pull stupid pranks on me, and I give them a taste of the bottom of my shoes whenever they dare do that, but I'm truly thankful to have them in my life. I feel blessed to have such loving family. Family members whom, without even thinking, will put themselves between me and whatever danger that's looming. They are everything in my life. I love them so much.